thank you everyone for taking your afternoon to spend with us for this seminar. We've got a lot of information packed in concise 2 hours, and hope that it'll be interesting and interactive and informative for you. I would like to give a special thank you to members of our ACM team who worked diligently to put this together. We are very excited to, I guess, reinstate our educational series. A lot of you have come and participated in workshops before, so thank you again for coming. I will ask our staff to stand, please. Any staff member that's in the room, please stand. So we have members of our accounting department, property management department, as well as our community management department represented here. And I would like to give special thanks while he's here to Tony Franquise, who's our executive assistant. He has worked diligently. Sarah Rolfe as well, our marketing coordinator. She's not here, but I want to just thank the two of them for really working hard to put the logistics together. So thank you. Our property management department is led by Mr. Bob Guerin. Bob, would you like to say a couple words?
Yeah, hi everyone. With that, that is the property management department. We, as some of you may know or may not know, we actually support the community managers with when they need proposals, contracts, construction issues, anything, project management, different things like that. I have a staff of 4 managers who are have some experience in construction, multifamily housing, which I come from that background for 30 years, and a lot of maintenance issues for stuff that, you know, the issue when you have something that you need our help, we're available for that. We also get out and do inspections on the properties as much as we can.
Yeah. Bob, if you could just speak louder.
We also get out on the properties and do inspections a couple times a year to look at the physical plan of the property. But we're available, you know, for special projects or anything else like that. So,
well, hopefully most of you could hear Bob, but we've often gotten a little confusion between the terms of property management and community management. ACM takes a different approach in that we have experts in the physical elements of the property as well as the governance and being your liaison to deal with meetings and your homeowners and things of that nature. So we really try to give you a team of people in addition to our accounting services and administrative support as well. So thank you, Bob. And 3 of the 4 departments actually work in developing your proposed budget. Contractually, we deliver a proposed budget to those who have our full management package. The accounting analysts work diligently in that regard, as well as the community manager and your property manager. So collectively, we hope to give you a really great product that you can use as a planning tool and to make decisions in your budget. Heather Griffing is our corporate administrative services manager. I'll let her tell you a little bit about what she does. And
sure, great. I oversee several departments within our company, including the front desk, the accounting and administrative portfolio, some of you might be part of. And one quick announcement that I have is we sent out an email a few months ago about a photo contest. We received a few entries, so we extended the deadline to July 15th. If you have any photos of your community, especially with the holiday weekend coming up, we'd love to see them. If you, my email is hgriffing@communitymanager.net or send them to your community manager. Thank you.
We also have 3 regional managers who are responsible for oversight of your community management. Charlene Pindell is walking in, and she is one of our most experienced managers here. Been here almost 20 years, so I've asked Charlene if she could say a few words as well.
I just want to say hello to everybody and hope that you get what you came for, good education about budgeting and reserve funding. I just want to thank you all for volunteering your time and your talent to do what you do for your communities. We know that sometimes it's with a lot of pain that you do this work, and you dedicate so much of your own free time. We are here to try to make it easier for you. You can call on us, the community managers, we have a great support staff with our administrative staff and our accounting department, and together we want to help work together to help you do more effective budgeting, and we hope that this is a good start towards that today. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlene. And without further ado, I will introduce our president and visionary and CEO, Mel Herzberger. He's going to say a few things to include our 2016 Maryland Legislature report.
Hi. We don't have a lot of legislative report today. There was the typical process. I think CAI reported there were 2,832 pieces of legislation offered up that had some bearing on community associations. We wound up with 4 bills being passed, which is not, it's usually not that low, but this is a process where we're still working out the logistics of a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature. What did pass, and there's a little report in your process, some have to do with mortgages and has to do with paying fees and collections of those fees. So we ask you to talk about this stuff with your collection attorney. We're going to talk about it again later in the fall, I guess. That seminar. But generally, if the debt holder forecloses, then the debt holder now has to contact the homeowner association, the condominium HOA, and they have to be responsible for the payment of those fees. That was one piece of legislation that passed. The second one is one that's more onerous on the association. If you have a judgment against the association, you're going to have to make sure that you meet the statute of limitation, that you renew that judgment, because it's not collectible if it's not. There was a piece of legislation that passed for individual homeowners, especially those who are going to rent their homes, and that requires a carbon monoxide detector in addition to smoke detectors. That was that was on the last day of the session that passed, but they were arguing about how many they were going to require to replace in the unit. If you're doing leasing, if you allow leasing in your community, this is the sort of thing that you should be making people aware of. There's a couple things that impact leasing, especially this, lead paint. If your community was built before 1979, the common areas have to be lead-free, lead-safe. So that's concerns that the association has, in addition to the concerns that the unit owner has, something you must consider. And this sort of requirement as far as carbon monoxide detector. And the one that we're sort of disappointed in, only because it didn't go far enough, was the legislation, and I should know it, 1192, Condominium and Homeowner Association Resale Disclosures and Fees. Now, what they did, and I was on the summer study for that, interim study for that, and we wanted them to include limitations on what lenders and mortgage companies, settlement companies could require of the association, and to extend the life of the resale package so that it would not expire sometime before people could get the settlement. But they didn't do that. What they did is they put a cap on the fee that can be charged, which is fine. Doesn't impact us because we don't charge that much money. But it does give us something to aspire to. But what it didn't do is it doesn't stop the repetitive request for information, which adds to the resale cost. They didn't address that at all. So we're somewhat disappointed in that. There are some things in here that are referred to interim study. Again, we would ask you to take a look at this with your boards, maybe your attorneys, and if there's anything you want us to do to assist, if you want to participate in these studies, we certainly will certainly help you do that. Nothing really earth-shattering in that respect, but that's there. These are things that have all been referred to the legislative committee for study over the summer. Used to be study over the summer, now there's an interim study. And then there's, at the end of this thing, there's a piece of legislation that's being offered up in Baltimore County. It's only Baltimore County. And it has to do with Section 8 rental programs in Section 8 and a source of income, which is a very big subject around the country these days, on buying and renting homes. Again, the text is in the back. That which is in bold is being added to the existing legislation, and the things that are bracketed are being removed. It brings into the mix on rentals and sales HUD and requirements to meet certain there's certain documents that HUD imposes on landlords now who volunteer to be part of the program will now be mandatory throughout the county. This kind of legislation was also offered in the state. It did not pass. Not to this extent, but it was offered. The only reason I bring it up to you is it's something I think if you are an association that has restrictions in your documents, or you're considering restrictions in your documents, as to the number of units that can be leased within your community. These are considerations that you have to talk to your attorney about in structuring that lease. If you offer a sample, a mandatory lease provision, these are the things you have to talk to them about. In some form, this is going to pass. The word on the street is that they're 2 votes shy of passing this in Baltimore County. So in all likelihood, if they don't pass it, their agreement, Baltimore County's agreement with HUD, is that they will reintroduce it for the next 12 years. I don't understand. But that is, that's HUD's sort of gentle persuasion into the thinking the right way. So a lot of people use Section 8 programs. They're wonderful programs. They help people who need that help. But they're voluntary now. This system is not voluntary. So this is going to affect all the sales and all of the rentals in Baltimore County. It's really an intrusion by the federal government like we've never quite seen. And I think as community leaders, you at least should take a look at it and prepare your community on how they're going to deal with it. Because it's not getting any publicity, as far as I know. Matter of fact, CAI didn't even mention it. So, which is unusual. But of course, the landlord group, which we also belong to, although we're not landlords, MMHA, they're all over this thing. But that's because it's part of our industry. And we don't think of ourselves in that industry, but in effect, we are. So that's the legislative wrap-up. We're starting a new session, of course, in January, so we'll let you keep you informed. Anything that you'd like us to address, we can do that. Let me know. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any possibility to pass legislation where the banks have to escrow condominium and homeowners fees?
Well, as a matter of fact, we suggested that 5 years ago in the middle of this little thing we had. And the banks agreed to do it. They did. Some of the companies who were there at that meeting agreed to do it. The people from the Federal Housing Administration agreed to do it. Yes.
Could you repeat the question, please?
The question is, can we ask banks to escrow fees like they escrow insurance premiums and other things, taxes? I assume that's what you're asking.
Exactly, like condo fees, in addition to real estate property taxes or homeowners insurance.
We think that would be a wonderful thing. If there's any lawyers in the room, let me apologize before I open my mouth and say that when I suggested that at that meeting, and it got a lot of support, and it was that that taking the food out of their families' mouths because that would cut down the amount of delinquency tremendously and an association fee. So yes, we did, and I did talk to Mr. Holmes. Marvin Holmes heads that committee. And this is his first year chairing the committee, and I want to go back and ask him to do that again. Of course, the banks have now changed their mind about that, but at this point, I think it's worth doing. You can reduce the cost all the way around.
The banks don't want to do this? Is there a reason that the banks?
The bank says that they don't know who to pay.
Huh?
The bank says the bank's first cause says that they don't know who to pay. And you know, there are other, and besides, why should they take that responsibility on it? They said if we have delinquencies, it's because the board's mismanaged, the management company's mismanaged, that's why we have delinquencies. But they leave themselves out of that equation, like lending money to people who can't afford to pay it back. But they have, this situation is one where I think that it would be a good thing for us to do that, and it would be severe. I mean, my brother's a banker, and you know, he for years and years and years, when I was a landlord, you know, I had a delinquency, and his delinquency was 1/10 of my delinquency, 1/50th of my delinquency. So people pay their mortgages; they don't necessarily pay their rent. If they don't pay their rent, they're not paying their association fee. And so I think it's unfair. I think if we incorporate that, we certainly have the ability here in our company, and most of the larger companies have the ability to separate those, getting those fees in, separate that and apply it to the accounts. So we can handle that. We don't think it's going to be a problem. We're not asking the bank to send us, you know, 1 check or 50 checks. We'll deal with them the same way they would pay the insurance company or anybody else. Anyway, that's yeah, it's a very good idea, and I think we're going to ask him to do it again. Mr. Holmes did say he would consider that. Any other questions? Okay.
What is the percentage of collection?
What is the percentage?
What is the
Worldwide?
percentage? In other words, are we like 20% of the whole, or what?
I don't know.
We haven't made that. I should ask the association.
Yeah, you should. Well, the association is the best thing to answer that question. But generally, we're looking to stay in that 5% area.
Yeah, because I'm gonna call
Or
you.
at least below the FHA threshold.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing about this sort of thing. I mean, there are requirements as to the number of units that can be leased under FHA approval if you're a condominium. There was a young lady in the House in 2015, Delegate Washington, I think her name is, and she put in a bill that would eliminate that. And I said, well, you can't. Who's going to tell the federal government to eliminate that?
Next thing is, what is the enforcement level? Because I know some people were in the rear and the enforcement took a long time.
And that's a decision that the board makes in accordance with their documents and the policies that they set. We're supposed to execute those requests of the board as to how to deal with an individual who stopped paying their fee. When it reaches a certain threshold, mostly the board will transfer that to a collection company or an attorney. And remember, they passed legislation last year that you can collect late fees and lawyers' fees,
Post-judgment. Post-judgment.
Post-judgment. So I mean, there's a lot of people working against you in this process. Just keep that in mind. Anything else?
Mel, would you know, even within your communities that you manage, how many are FHA certified? What percentage?
I think most of the condominiums are FHA certified. I would think overwhelmingly, probably, I would say, Chrissy's not here, is she?
We have a handout in the binder. I think we got, 14 this year or within the last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think
yeah.
I think most are, I think at least 80% are certified. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it does help people sell. That's the idea. That's one thing. I just want to say one thing, because I want to thank the people who worked with our staff on the on improving our software system. And we've been listening to that. And this young lady back here, Heather, and her friend in Timonium, Christy, who does some of our training, are working with the ball team and some board people, I think, to come up with some better solutions so that we can make it easier to get in and out of the website. We can include things like action items, and we can do things that we haven't been able to do in the past. And we're very excited about that, so we'll keep you posted as we move forward on that. Thank you very much.
And I failed to introduce myself. My name is Theresa Edwards. I've interacted with many of you, but I just we have bios for all of our key staff in the binder, but I thought you at least want to know my name. So I wanted to just thank our guests for coming today. Jim Cunningham is here from Union Bank, and I'll talk a little bit about Jim's going to be first to go up, and Douglas Greene is here from DMA Interactive Reserves, and I saw his product at a CAI event and was very impressed with it, getting away from the notion of a reserve study that's static, and that's a piece of paper that you get, you know, and you look at it maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years, but he's going to show you a product that you can use as a management and decision-making tool as you do projects in your community. So Jim Cunningham, most of you know that our operating accounts are maintained in Union Bank. There are many reasons that ACM selected Union Bank. We always go with an FDIC insured bank, but also he's going to tell you about some of the great products that they offer us in managing your funds and collecting assessments and making payments on bills. I whispered to Jim when that question came up about escrowing fees, and one of the things that came to my mind was, well, banks aren't in the business of accounting, and that's what Jim said, and that we then have a third party to rely on collecting and remitting your payments and your cash flow. So just another thought on that. But it would certainly be a good thing to be able to reduce the collections. Jim has been with Union Bank since 2008. He's a vice president and regional account executive, supporting the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region, and Jim is very much engaged in our thought processes here, and we're always wanting to reinvent the wheel and do new things and give better products to our clients. So he hears from me frequently and from our other members of our accounting team. So Jim, thank you for coming. Union Bank also provided a sponsorship for this program today, so thank you, Union Bank, for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the introduction. I wrote that. We'll start off with a story about a branch in Florida near Disney World. And Patricia Flack works the customer service desk there. And one day a frog walked into the bank. And she greeted him, said, "Yes, sir, how can I help you?" He said, "I'd like to take out a loan." She said, "Yeah, please come take a seat." So they went back and sat down. She says, "May I ask what the loan is?" He said, "I want to get a new pad." So she said, "Okay, do you have any income?" He said, "No, I don't have any income." She said, "Do you have any savings?" He said, "No, I don't have any savings." She said, "Do you have anything at all that we could use as collateral against the loan?" And he thought for a second, and he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out this beautiful, intricate carving of the castle of the Magic Kingdom. She looked at it, it was beautiful. She said, "Hold on just a second." So she walked into the branch manager, and she said, "I got a frog out here that wants a loan. He doesn't have any income. He doesn't have any savings. When I asked for collateral, he gave me this. Have you ever seen anything like it before?" Branch manager took it, looked at it, handed it back to her, and said, "That's a knick-knack, paddywhack. Give that frog a loan." I just want to introduce the complex world. We process your payments for you.
It's an alligator story.
Yeah. So we're grateful for your business. Unlike a bank where you're taking out a loan and you got to try to treat the banker very well so they'll give you a loan, you're giving us money to begin with, so we got to treat you well. And Union Bank is the 21st largest bank in the country. We started off in San Francisco. in 1846, actually supplying the gold rush businesses that sprung up out there during the gold rush. And in 1992, before any other bank in the country started an HOA division, Union Bank in California started an HOA division. So they're very fond of HOA business. I actually began with Smart Street, which was an internet bank out of Atlanta, Georgia. And that started about 12 years ago. Believe it or not, internet banking was brand new just 12 years ago. And we didn't have any branches anywhere. We didn't have any clients anywhere. So the only way we could interest people was to make our services free. And people were still reluctant because typically what would happen is they would receive checks into their offices, they would lay them out on a table by association, then they would write out a deposit slip, then they would take those deposits to the bank, deposit them, then they would come back and post all those payments manually into their accounting software. So we had a system over the internet that simplified that quite a bit. And so our first customer we got was in Alaska. So it was kind of a proof of concept. If it would work in Alaska and the banks in Atlanta, Georgia, then we had something going for us. So we had free services, we had systems that were designed for HOA, we do some special things. It used to be that when you would log into a bank, you could log into one bank account at a time. Well, companies like American Community Management had probably hundreds of accounts. And so to log in and out of all those accounts is just an abnormal business model for a bank to encounter. Normally we're dealing with commercial businesses like a plumbing supply business or a doctor's office, and they're going to have one account, maybe two accounts. Well, this company has 200 accounts, so they got to be able to access them all without logging in and out all the time. Some other things that we did, sometimes a homeowner will be in arrears, the attorney will tell you not to accept any more payments because it's already into the legal process. So we designed a way to block it, so that if the payment comes in, if they're illegal, then we stop the payment and send it to the attorney or whatever the management company instructs us to do. So we can block it both mailed check mailed into us and also block it online, so that even if they try to do a bill pay, it's just returned to them. We also allow for splitting of payments. Sometimes we have investors who will own a number of properties in your community, and they like to send in one check because it's good for them, and so we have to figure out how to split that up between the 2 properties they own and the 6 properties that they own, so that that payment can be applied to the proper account number. And we make a download online after we've processed all of their payments, so that the management company can go in and push a button, and all the payments we receive will go into their accounting software and post to your particular account. So again, some specific things that we did for HOA that your typical bank on the corner or even your regional bank or your national bank doesn't offer. So by specializing in HOA, we've been able to grow quite a bit over the years. We're the 21st largest bank in the country, according to the Federal Reserve. So this is what we've accomplished so far. We're up to the point now that we're serving 4 million homeowners, processing their payments either on a monthly or quarterly or semi-annual or annual basis. So in the payment center lockbox in Atlanta, we're probably processing 1.6 million payments every month. And our accuracy rate is about 99%. And you can see the number of payments that we're taking care of. So we are the largest HOA bank in the country. Our online payments, some of you may use this portal already. We also came up with that for the convenience of the homeowners. Once they started to adopt the internet, faster, cheaper, better was the business model for the internet versus the brick and mortar model with the branches. So we had to come up with a way to pay online, so we work with all the major credit cards, American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Discover. Now we have to charge a fee for that because the credit card companies charge us a merchant fee. And so we can't allow the one homeowner paying by credit card to be subsidized by the other homeowners who are writing a check or paying in another fashion, ACH, check, that sort of thing. The good news is our credit card payments are less than 1% of payments. So it's not that big of a product in terms of the volume that we have. Now e-check, if you're familiar with that term, is just where you can go online. You enter your bank routing number, your bank account number, the amount you want us to pay. take out of your account, and then hopefully your account number with the American Community Management. And there's no charge for that. And what's nice about this is you can set up the date that we process that for you. So you tell us if your payment is due on the 10th of the month, you can tell us, I'd like to pay this on the 9th of the month, and that's when we take it out of your account. Now, another thing that we do for HOA, they have to make sure that people, let's say the due date is the 10th, and people want to be shown as having paid on the 10th. Even though it takes 3 days for the credit card company to get us the payment, sometimes 5 days, it takes 3 days for the Fed to get it through the system to get us the payment. We go ahead and fund your account the day that the payment goes in on our web portal. So we really don't have the payment yet, but we go ahead and put it in there so that the accounting software will reflect that you have paid that day, even though we haven't been paid. We're betting on the company. So that's another convenience to the homeowner that we've designed into our system. When we look at payment trends over the years, this is from 2004. Back in those days, 3/4 of the people paid with a check. And you can see the adoption. It's kind of like the internet and the technology has been growing over the years to the point now where less than 40% of our payments are check payments mailed to the lockbox. So 60% of our payments are coming through electronically. And that's with ACH, that's where you can volunteer to have the payments taken out of your bank account automatically by American Community Management. Bill pay, where you go onto your bank and you log in and you say pay this amount to this vendor, pay this amount to that vendor, which causes some complications because the banks don't really do that process. There are bill pay vendors that goes to, then the bill pay vendor, if somebody's on the electronic data exchange, they'll pay them electronically. If a vendor's not on there, like a plumber or something, they put out a little check about this big and send it off. And so when we get those, we don't get it without a coupon like we do with a normal check, so it's a little bit more difficult to handle. So we have worked with the bill pay vendors. One of them is Online Resources, the other one is Fiserv, I believe. And Online Resources is right around the corner from our operation centers in Atlanta. And so we worked with them to take those little paper checks, and rather than receiving that every month and researching it, once we find out where it belongs, we turn it into an electronic transaction. Again, making things easier for the payment getting processed and directed to the proper account in ACM's accounting software. The RDC is remote deposit capture. That's a scanner. That's typically for your smaller management companies where they have people actually come into the management company office and drop their check off there. So they got to get it to a bank somewhere they don't have a branch to go to. So we have given them a scanner so they can scan the check in and the deposit will go in that way. And we also modified our scanner because typically a bank will give a business a scanner and it can only scan into one bank account. Well, with ACM having 200 bank accounts, we had to change our scanner software so that it could scan 200 checks from 200 different accounts and direct it to the right account. So we had to write additional software for our scanner that other banks don't provide. Credit card, again, that's less than 1% of payments. It used to be that people were paying with their credit card. When we polled them, we wanted to find out why they wanted the points, which didn't make sense to me, but they're paying $14.95 to get points, but some people preferred it that way. And e-check, I just explained, it's a self-service thing that you can go onto our website and enter your own information, and you can set it up to be recurring so that you don't have to go back and do it every month. It'll just automatically come out on the date that you choose to take it out of your banking account. But you can see the patterns there. The lockbox is in blue, and 3 out of 4 payments we used to receive were checks. Now it's 4 out of 10 or less. So everybody's adopting technology. Whoops. So we look at American Community Management payments over the last 12 months. We have processed 175,000 payments for your associations in the last year. Banks typically charge for processing payments. We don't charge anything for that. So we've done the work. We like to try to keep manual labor out of it as much as possible, so that's why we're trying to automate everything, have everything done electronically so that nobody actually ends up touching the payment. It comes into our payment center, it goes through a lockbox machine, it gets put into a payment download. ACM logs onto our website, downloads that payment, it goes into the accounting software and posts to your account with your association. So we can compare the national average there, the quantity percent total to, the ACM percent to a national average. And Maryland people are doing a lot better. They're almost 21% in e-check, so you guys already know about e-check. Lockbox, you're right on. A little bit lower on the ACH, where ACM will take the money out for you. And then bill pay is right on. So basically in line, Maryland's a little bit ahead on e-check payments. Now, one thing that is a big issue today with banking, with anyone really, is fraud. You see the stories in the paper every day about databases being hacked and information being taken out on the dark web, they call it, which is people are selling personal information and profiles on the web. So as a bank, as a national bank, or actually international bank, we're owned by MUFG out of Japan. We get hacked about 1,000 times a day from Russia, China, North Korea, Eastern Europe. And there are certain standards that are set by the federal government for banks as far as their security standards to be able to prevent that sort of thing. And so we enhance that as well. One of the things that's going on today is it's called phishing, where you'll get an email, it looks like it's legitimate, and only one letter is different in the email address. So just be one letter is different. It looks like it's from your provider, from your vendor, from your medical insurance company, something like that. It'll ask you to respond. It'll ask you to open a file, or it'll ask you to go to a link. And it could be that file or that link will go into a malware where it actually locks your computer up, and then it gives you a number to call that you have to pay to get them to release your data. I'm sure everyone's seen these kind of stories. And so the bank is very aware of fraud and situations. As a matter of fact, they send me phishing emails every month, and you'd be surprised at the number of people in the bank that know that our phishing division is going to be sending out these emails to us to test us. And one person out of 10,000 will hit that thing, and we all fail. Because one person didn't think and opened up a link. Of course, it doesn't do anything, it's harmless, but those kind of deals go on constantly at the bank because we have your bank account information, and we have to house it and have it be secure. And one thing that I learned recently at an executive summit that we had for our management companies, we had the former CIO of the White House under President Obama, and she's a fraud expert. And she pointed out a website to us that can be used by every one of you, used by anyone. And it allows you to check things out if you get a suspicious email. And so what this does, because I'll get emails from my friends all the time, and it looks funny, like, did you send me this poem, from a guy, And so I'll have to email them back or call them up and say, did you send me this, before I'll open it, open the file or open the link. So what this allows you to do is that you can copy the link that's in the body of the email, but don't open it. Go to virustotal.com, put the URL into this field right here, and then hit scan it, and it'll bring back if there's been any reports that it's malicious. And it'll do the same thing for an attachment. It's also got an option, you pick file, and then you copy the name of the file, put it into the search box, and then hit search it. And also, if you just want to search a term, if you think something is suspicious, you can just put the term in there that is in an email or something that you're unfamiliar with, and it'll come back if that particular term has shown up as being suspicious. This could be the name of the company that's sending you an email, that sort of thing. So, I use it just because the CIO of the White House told me to. So that's it. If anybody's got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Just a quick one. So about the fraud and virus and how you protect the data that comes into the bank, isn't the most vulnerable data the data at rest? Isn't that where like the places like Target and those types of places were hacked, the data that's at rest was not being secured as opposed to the Griffing process?
Well, I mean, most of our data is at rest because we process payments daily, but it sits there possibly for a month before anything goes out. So it's pretty a dynamic process. Payments are coming in all the time, and we know that your bank account number is in our database. So it's really not the data at rest so much as far as the whole system and the firewall and the stuff you get in there. The Target intrusion was from a contract, and I actually spoke to the contractor. And they didn't know, they had a laptop, they went into the database, they were building Target stores, and they went in to find something about a specification for the store they were building, and the hacker got in that way, and somehow through the construction department, got over to the database of the credit card numbers for all of the customers. So we have to secure everything, because it's the bank account numbers, we can't be lax in any part of the database.
You said you copy the message,
Well, you copy the link.
you copy the link.
Yes, you don't copy the message, just copy the link. There's a hyperlink in there.
Oh,
You just copy that. Don't open it. Just take your cursor and go across it, and then right click to hit copy.
okay, yeah, okay. And then you go to your
Then you go to virustotal.com. You put your cursor here, and then right click and hit paste. And then you hit the scan it. And you can do the same thing for a file. If the file is like hibuddy.com or .doc, like a Word document, and you're going like, I don't get this, or this looks funny, you just copy the name of the file, put that in here, and hit scan. So it's taking in reports all the time about malicious files, malicious URL links, hyperlinks, and malicious companies. So you can even just go in and search the company to see if there's anything been reported as far as malware.
like my antivirus tells me right away, this is suspicious. So this is a different antivirus right there.
Right. I figured if the White House uses it, I could use it, and it's free. Yes, sir.
I'll try to ask this loud enough so people can hear it. Since I've been in the back here, I've had a little problem this afternoon. I pay my condo fees by e-check. And when I sign on into Union Bank, I see an account that's my account that you have for me, right?
Nope, because that's in the accounting system. So I'm not going to have your balance. We just process the payments.
No, I'm not saying you have my balance, and maybe I used the wrong term in account. You've got a record of me.
You've logged in and you've created a recurring payment.
Right.
By e-check. Right, so you've got a login and a password.
Right. Okay. I enter my bank account information, routing number, amount of the payment, and so on. And I get a response from Union Bank that I can print out saying it was received and processed.
Should get a confirmation.
Right. Now, I'm treasurer of my HOA, and we're paying vendors, a groundskeeper, for example, who are submitting invoices to ACM. How does that invoice get through ACM over to you at Union Bank so you can issue a check to that specific vendor? Do you have a whole list of those vendors?
I can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really an accounting function for them getting paid.
Union Bank doesn't process the payable side of the accounting process. We have an accounts payable department that handles, starting with your community manager who has to review and approve your invoice.
Right.
But we process checks and payments to vendors in-house. So Union Bank's, I guess, the value of working with Homeowner Association Services, their proprietary software is the homeowner collections of payment side.
Okay.
Accounting, yeah.
So that's the difference. There's
That's the
one is
the
homeowner collections and the other through you at ACM Accounting is payments to vendor.
Right, correct.
We receive the checks for ACM, give them a file they can put into their accounting software. They write checks, and then we get that check against the account, and then we pay the check when they instruct us to pay.
Thank you.
Correct. And really the value of Union Bank is the economies of scale. And imagine the days, as you talked about earlier, where payments had to be processed manually by people. It would really put an additional level of effort as well as cost on being able to process that volume of checks. But that doesn't mean that the payment side stops there. As you all know, we have a collections department. We also have a team of accounting analysts who reconcile your accounts monthly. So that entire process collectively, you know, presents you with all of your accounting data. So it's definitely a vital piece in being able to provide.
I'm just a vendor to Theresa. Teresa's doing your accounting. So I'm just here to serve her.
We count on them a lot. Daily, I mean, as Jim said, daily. We are going into the bank. We are pulling in thousands of payments, making sure they're allocated to the right accounts. And then our analysts have the responsibility at the end of the month to make sure all of those payments got in the right place. So it's really I don't want to say tedious, but it is a labor-intensive process that is enabled to be a little more streamlined with the bank's service.
It was only 175,000 payments last year.
And that number sounds lovely.
We're happy to do it for you. Thank you very much for your business.
Yes. Well, while Heather's getting a PowerPoint set up, I just wanted to point to a few things that are in your binder. Budgeting. Wow, budgeting and reserves. It's a loaded subject, but budgeting is as much a thought process as it is a numbers process. As you know, the numbers are only as good as the thought and the planning that goes into it. And so we have a pretty intense process here where we start working on budgets probably about 120 days prior to the end of your fiscal year. Just because we have to, you know, look at, you know, recaps, and we plan contracts, and we plan timing, and, you know, talk to you all as board members on, you know, your satisfaction with your current service providers. So there's a lot that goes into that. So, you know, we'll try to comprise all of that, all of those steps into a presentation that's useful for you. We also provided a worksheet that you can go along with as we go through the presentation. If you think of any notes, or, you know, you're thinking, oh yeah, we're planning this project, or this cost has been a little bit extensive on our budget, and we need to look at a different approach to services that we're currently getting, feel free to use this worksheet to make notes. There's also a few articles here for you. There's articles on we have a budget workbook that we created, which kind of comprises the steps of budgeting. Some of you may be familiar with the CERA, Common Interest Realty Associations is the technical term or title of the industry. And the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants actually produced a guide for the auditors who look at your books. So there's a section from that guide on budgets and the budget process. And you may find that to be a little more technical, but should be informative as well. We also have a handout in the binder that talks about capital improvements in a project task list that may be helpful for some of you. Reserve fund accounting, and Mr. Greene is going to talk extensively about reserves, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about reserves. But one of the key things that a lot of questions we've gotten over the past several years is, how do I know if it's maintenance or if it's reserves? So we'll hear a lot more about that. What should go in your operating budget as opposed to your reserves? So we're going to feel free to follow along with the presentation in your binder. Again, this is not an easy topic to make interesting, but I'm going to do my best. But just as a little icebreaker, who in the room is actually a treasurer, serving the treasury function on the board? Right. So, you know, being in the treasury function, everybody looks to you to be the numbers expert. You know, hopefully you see your ACM team here as your partner in that. We're always available to work with you. We have an accounting analyst assigned to each of our communities. So feel free to to contact us if you have any concerns following this seminar that's specific to your community. So I thought that a fitting term for this would be how to stay fiscally fit. So what are some of the practical reasons for a budget? Let me just make sure this is going to work before I embarrass myself. I'll stick to the computer. Sometimes the gadgets. Great. Okay, great. Now I can control this.
There's a link.
Okay, yeah, I'll come with it. All right, so what are the practical reasons for budgeting? Why do we have to go through this process other than obviously the regulatory requirements? It's a basis for determining your assessment levels. So our approach here is to start with your expenses first. I know there's the there's always a focus on assessments, and do we keep the assessments the same? Do we increase the assessments? But it's really impossible to determine what your assessment level should be before you've taken a look at your costs and your obligations. It provides a control element in your financial statements. So imagine having a year-to-date actual without having a budget. So there's no baseline to determine if you're within your original plan, or if you've exceeded it, or if you're doing, need to re-strategize controlling costs. It basically acts as a baseline for performance measurement and management of costs. So, how are we doing as a board? How are we doing in terms of, looking at the needs of the community? So it's really a tool to be used, and we encourage, reviewing financial statements as regularly as possible, and it is always our goal to deliver a report to you on a monthly basis. As well as, some of you know who use our website, some information is also available in real time, such as your delinquency information. Preventing and foreseeing cash flow shortages. So seeing things before it gets to a point of no return. Being able to prevent deteriorating property. So if you know where your numbers are, if you know that, whether you have the resources that you need to maintain the property, you're enabled to then have a reasonable and a realistic plan. It's a tool for accounting for various funds. We have as much flexibility as you need in terms of looking at costs, analyzing costs, developing reports. So if you have a specific project that you're thinking of doing, we can track those funds separately. As a matter of fact, we just worked with one of our communities to set up a separate fund so that they could see the accumulation of the assessments dedicated to a siding project that they're doing. It will help give that board a visual of what their resources are instead of just containing all of the funds in one account. It minimizes the unexpected. I mean, it's just in our own personal budgeting, without having an idea of what our inflows and our outflows are. It's very easy to have those unexpected costs from time to time. So even planning for, sometimes it's called a contingency. I like to call it an operating savings, but having a plan for the unexpected. The blizzard, I hate to bring that up, but no one, from year to year, the common question when we're doing budgets is, how much do we budget for snow? Well, it's all you can use in that case is trends in history, but history doesn't really dictate what the snowstorm is going to be next year or the year after. You can get creative and use almanacs and rely on the meteorologist's report, but really it's important to have a plan in the event that it far exceeds the funds that you've set aside. Balancing the needs and desires of actual resources. So sometimes there's things that we want to do in the community, but we simply don't, it's not realistic. We simply don't have the money in the budget to do it. So maybe we say, okay, we're going to put this on the wish list, and over time, it may be a 1-year project or a 2-year project. We've seen some boards tackle things phasing. So you want to, beautify the entire community. Well, maybe we can do a portion this year and another portion next year. But it really gives you the information you need to formulate a plan. And then probably extremely important to the condominium condominium boards here is the, it was mentioned earlier, obtaining FHA approval, so that you widen your buyer pool. And hopefully that will lead to enhancing your property values or maintaining values. But also outside financing. The better you manage your finances, banks are going to look at your cash flow. They're going to look at, of course, delinquency. If in an event that you need a project loan, those things are extremely important. They're going to look at your budget report to see how well the money's being managed and how the assessments are committed, more importantly. So, what should a carefully constructed budget look like? It should have a detailed narrative. I really emphasize that heavily. 6 months after you've determined your numbers, you may not remember how you arrived at a certain value for a certain line item. So having a narrative, having the notes that you can justify to your homeowners if questions are asked, or you can go back to as a resource even for you in planning for the future is important. Explain your assumptions that you use to arrive at each line item and sources of information. Any contract terminations may present the opportunity for renegotiation or rebidding. Verify guidelines contained within your governing documents. Hopefully most of you know that there are allocation of assessments to each unit in a lot of communities. So based on the type of community, the terminology is a little different between condos and HOAs. But for example, if you're a condo, there's an undivided percentage of interest that you allocate to your units. Once you've determined that, you can determine what your total assessments need to be. That total has to match your total budgeted income line item. So when we review part of our process here is we review before we order coupons, we do a comparison. We take the number of units times their percentage interest, and then we multiply that by your total budget, and we add all of it together to make sure that there's not a shortfall, that it all it's reconciled. Does that make sense? Making sure that you're budgeting the amount that you're actually billing. That's extremely important. Similar with HOAs, there may be a separate type of assessment between townhomes and single-family homes. Reviewing the maximum allowed increase. That's an ongoing discussion. What's the maximum we can increase? Although we may not want to go to the maximum, knowing the extent is important. So whether it's 10, whether it's 15%, or higher or lower is important. We have at least one community that's actually governed by the Consumer Price Index, which we know has been extremely low. But their attorneys really put them in a bind in writing those documents. But their maximum is whatever that annual factor is. Remember the adopted budget is a legal record. It's a legal document. So one of the things to keep in mind, this document goes into your resale package. It goes on record within your books and records. It goes into your audit process. So the budgeting process, although it can be a pain, is extremely important. So there are two sources of information that governs the regulatory requirement of preparing an annual budget. So if you're an HOA, you're governed by the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Section 11B 112.2. And there's a copy that has more detail in your binder, so I'm not going to bore you with reading all of this. But essentially, both the Condominium Act, which is 11109.2, preparation of the annual budget, both require that you submit a proposed budget to your membership 30 days before its adoption. That's the important thing, 30 days before its adoption. But the language varies, so there's some more specificity pertaining to HOAs, for example, and what types of HOAs it applies to. But in terms of the requirement as a board, it's the same. And it also goes further to say what the contents of your budget should be. At a minimum, the line items should have income, administration, maintenance, utilities, general expenses, reserves, and capital items. Any questions so far? Yes.
When you prepare a budget, do you project the amount of delinquencies that might not come in? So in other words, a certain percentage of money is not going to be received by the association. So then how does that affect your operating costs?
It's actually a future slide, but if you have delinquency that's material, usually if it's $1,000 or less, we may or may not include it in your budget. But what we do is we make a calculation of what your beginning delinquency was for that year, and we look at what it is year to date. We do a projection based on the number of owners that are delinquent, varying stages. We take that into account, so if they're with the attorney. But then we also apply a factor because we assume the attorney is going to collect something. Probably 4 to 5 years ago, we actually did a pretty detailed analysis with the 7 or 8 different law firms that we work with, and we came up with a number of about 40%. So if you have, $1,000 in delinquency, you'll probably collect $400. I mean, that's the reality. Now, over time, that number is going to go down. So the older those accounts are, the less you're likely to obtain through the attorney. So once it goes to collections, unfortunately, the probability does go down. But we stress the enforcement of your collections policy, keeping it fresh in the minds of your homeowners, letting them know that you're going to be consistent and people are going to be held responsible. But I will talk about that more. But yes, your budget needs to reflect any reasonable amount of assessments you expect not to collect, because otherwise you're planning to spend 100% when you may only collect 90 or 95%. So you're essentially building in a deficit. So yes, that's extremely, thank you for that question. That's extremely important. So why is budgeting so important? What's all this, about budgets? Well, there's 3 things that I wanted to talk about. It's really all about planning. Really, from year to year, it's just about planning. In a lot of cases, if you have reasonably little common elements, you have really little change in contracts, you may only have 1 or 2. In a lot of cases, the budget process can be pretty straightforward if there are not a lot of changes needed. But it's important to ask the questions, such as, given the fact that community associations' resources are essentially fixed. We're not for-profit organizations where we can plan, to plan on excess proceeds. So once you set your assessments, that's essentially the source that you have to work with. Establishing the level of assessments needed to maintain your common elements and pay for your expenses is critical. Imagine if, the budget was thrown together and you left out a $5,000 line item. I mean, that could be a major oversight. So again, as I said earlier, it's as much the thought process as it is the numbers. One drives the other. Association sources should always equal your anticipated uses. And again, I recommend some type of modest plan for the unexpected. The second reason is the variable nature of certain costs. Certain costs are just not fixed. They're going to require periodic reviews to control, such as disbursements. For things like maintenance, on-site maintenance. No 2 years are going to be identical. Even if you're dealing with the same issues, no 2 years of costs are going to be identical. Things, reviewing spending trends, inspection reports, recommendations, looking at what type of repairs to prevent further damage are all important. The third being funding reserves. So a comprehensive reserve study to assign a replacement cost and an estimated useful life to each component. It also considers inflation and earnings. So all of these things should be taken into account, not to back into the reserve number or back into, because that's often the case that we want to hold assessments, or we want to make a fixed number and say we're only going up 5%. And I know I'm going to step on some toes here, and I'm always telling my managers we have to propose what we think is reasonable. Board, you guys make the decision. You make the decision on we want to cut. But our job is to make a reasonable recommendation to you what we think is needed to maintain the community. Yes.
I was going to ask, how often should we do or conduct a reserve study?
I'll let Doug answer that. But we typically say 3 to 5 years. But given the interactive nature of the study, he may have a different answer. So what's the framework? So the things that we instill in our team here are the following. So preparation starts at least 120 days, as I mentioned earlier, prior to your fiscal year end. That is because we walk backwards. So if you have to give a budget to your membership 30 days before it's adopted, that means you're looking at the holidays. You're looking at, and a lot of boards don't want to wait that long if you're on assuming you're on a year of regular calendar year end. So we really want to get the budget in your hands in the early fall. We really do. So our planning starts midsummer. So unfortunately, this is the busiest time for our staff, is working on, compiling and reviewing and preparing a budget for you. We project the current year total costs. We look at, year-to-date actuals. We note any deviations from your current year expectations. But also, I'll add to that, we look at the history of your property. So maybe you have things that happen biannually. Maybe you only do certain activities twice a year. We look at the trends and we look at the patterns of when things are needed. We look at your contracts. It includes everything, your maintenance, your legal, your management, your audit, insurance, anything that's fixed, we look at that. We look at whether we can reduce the cost of that, or we can get a multi-year contract to save on the inflation factor, or just to, stay away from the overly changing your budget from year to year to control your assessments. We review the reserve study. We look at your funding levels. We compare what the reserve study is recommending versus what's actually being put into the account. In some cases, when a community is not managing their funds, we see where year to year, and it's going to happen occasionally, but year to year, if you're borrowing from your reserves to pay for operating, that's a red flag. Occasionally there's going to be cash flow timing issues, but if it's a recurring concern where you're having to transfer to pay bills, that's something to really think about. We may really need to make a tough decision about the level of our assessments, or looking at other items, special project needs, such as special assessments, which is a bad word. We don't like to think of that, but it's an option, and it's something to consider if the need arises. And loans, of course, if the association qualifies. And the only deterrent really to getting a loan would be delinquency. And that's the biggest thing. I've worked with banks that will go as high as 15%, but most of them, they want to see no more than a 10% rate of delinquency. We review your wish list. So, what are the things that the board's talking about? We're going to do a little extra landscaping. We want to do another day of cleaning, janitorial services. Whatever those things are, we look at those things and we try to incorporate line items for that. And then we evaluate collections. It's last, but it's certainly not least. But it's just the approach for backing into the assessments. We look at your collections to determine if there needs to be changes, enforcements of fines, looking at any possible way. We reach out to the attorneys. We try to, encourage them to be more aggressive. So there are two types of budgeted line items: mandatory line items and discretionary line items. So essentially, the mandatory are those fixed costs, those things that you must do to maintain the property. They're required, they're services that satisfy your duty of care. If you don't do it, you can see the property deteriorating, or it's just evidence, and usually you'll hear complaints from your homeowners. These are expenses that the association needs to function and preserve the value and longevity of the property. It could include painting and maintenance. It could include critical systems. It could include stormwater management. It could include many things that you must do to meet state and county regulations. Discretionary is where you have a little more flexibility. So, looking at those things like, are there things we could defer or maybe minimize? We give ourselves a budget, we work within that total. It could be, the things that come to mind are like social events, which we encourage, community, it's all about community, but those are discretionary lines. Landscaping, beautification, things of that nature, those are things that you have a little bit of wiggle room in your budget that you may be able to, they're elective. Essentially the board makes the decision, you get a little flexibility there. So just going over, and again, feel free to follow along with the report as we talk about these things. So administrative costs, what we're looking at is how can we just streamline and reduce? So a lot of communities that come here, I'm not trying to sell the company, but we have seen drastic reductions in administrative costs because of our website, because of the ability to send out electronic notices, because of our offering, services like Game Bank, where we don't have to order as many coupons or as many statements. So how can we reduce those things? Insurance is in that category. How can, constantly bidding your insurance policy, annually to see if we can reduce your premiums and maintain costs there. A lot of times that's your largest line item in the administrative category. Utilities, we usually contract rates for 2 years. We bid it to the various sources, Constellation, Direct Energy, and we try to get a fixed rate for our communities as much as possible. Energy studies, things of that nature. Maintenance and site costs. Is it feasible to just take a different approach, such as the frequency of doing certain things? And I invite any members of my staff to chime in if you have any examples or ideas and how you advise boards to reduce costs. But how can we take a different look? That's really the question. How can we, if we see that our budget is stretched, in a lot of cases it is, how can we take a different look? What can we do differently to, of course, bidding, but also, are all of these costs necessary and essential to maintain the property? Contract fixed costs, reviewing scope of works for services, renegotiating, base the contract on your actual needs, look for the fluff that the contractor may try to stick in there. Plan project and reserve needs separately, as I said earlier, rather than plugging the difference. Because those reserve items will catch up with you if they're underfunded, for sure, at some point. It may seem like a long time when we see the graph and it's 20 or 30 years in the future, but it has to be a cumulative effort over the years. So how do we respond to challenges in special projects? Expenses outpacing income is one example. How do we make sure that our assessments keep up with inflation? We review contracts annually. I mean, that's what your ACM team does. We negotiate multi-year pricing. And some of this is repetitive, but it really is, again, about the thought process. Reviewing common line items that exceed projections. Planning accordingly for the coming year. So the first, expenses outpacing income. We really want to prevent that from happening. We're looking at aging buildings or major upgrades needed. Those may require even more planning. Special project financing may be an option. Addressing planned major projects into your interactive reserve study. So funding levels should be realistic. Deferred maintenance can extend the life of a component, things of that nature. Budgetary cuts or realignments may be inevitable. You may have to say, well, the safety is really more important than the aesthetics. And that's tough. That's a tough call, but it's about prioritizing. Income is inadequate. So we review, we implement a strong collections policy. We recommend that if you don't have one, certainly work with your attorney. Most of the attorneys that we work with will do, if they're already hired for your collection services, they'll do your collections policy in a lot of cases free of charge. It really helps to have a policy. In addition to, that gives the detail to what's in your bylaws, but really laying out the specific steps that's required to reinforce, whether it's the number of days after turnover or what are your guidelines for a payment plan, but really making that policy specific that you can enforce. Communicating with the collection attorney. I mean, I know that seems obvious, but one of the things that is important is really to force them to look at your accounts on a regular basis. Don't assume that the collections attorney is looking at everything regularly. Some of the questions we ask them is how many paralegals do you have? What is your ratio of attorneys to accounts? How often are you actually looking at the accounts to say, we can do more here. We need to take a different approach. We've had this account for 5 years. We've collected nothing. So really keeping that communication ongoing. The bylaws allowing your percent increase. Really looking at that. It's important to reevaluate needs annually. And in some cases, a retroactive increase may be an option. We don't recommend it, but in some cases, it could be an option. If you've gone for 5 years without an increase, it's a possibility that you can catch up in a way. Your homeowners may not be happy, but they may prefer that than having a special assessment. The manager is not here, but we actually had a manager who experienced a property that had to assess, based on an emergency situation, a $5,000 special assessment to each owner. That's the type of thing you want to prevent. You never want, I mean, we can't anticipate emergencies always, but if you have a contingency and you have adequately funded reserves, that shouldn't really be, hopefully, ever necessary. So, talking about assessment income and adjusting for the shortfall. Back to your question. So what are the collections from the unit owners? What are the actual cash that we're receiving in from those accounts? Again, the income budget assumes 100% collections from all community members. That's where you start. That's your baseline. Then that's your gross potential based on your total expenses. So if you're expecting to receive 100%, that's great, wonderful. Then you plan on all owners paying in a timely manner, and you plan your expenses to match that number. In most cases, that's not realistic. So you want to include an estimate in the budget for estimated assessments, uncollectible assessments, to adjust your income down to a reasonable estimation of your assessments. Really taking a look at what you may not collect. Some of the things that's come up in terms of how do we increase, this is a classic question, always asked, whether it's at a CAI event or a collection seminar, how do we really get ahead of this collections issue? Amnesty is a possibility, saying, we're going to waive late fees and interest for a certain amount of time. Looking at, getting more aggressive during tax season. I mean, sending the message to the community that you're going to exert all options to collect. I mean, there are really extreme examples now that are coming up in this industry as, really extreme tactics. We look at firms and we look at options all the time that we can pass along to you. Some of them we think are a little bit too extreme. Like really the goal of being to take the property. Now some boards may say, look, if they're not paying, they need to go. But that's really a community decision. Sheriff sales and things of that nature to get the unit owner out so you can then get a renter there, but it's based on the timeliness of the bank and how quickly they foreclose. There's so many decisions and so many things that can be considered in increasing your assessment income, but it really does have to be a strategic, approach. Yes.
Going back to responding to budgetary challenges and special projects,
Yeah.
These are things that you're saying that ACM does on behalf of the associations?
And in coordination with the board. I mean, we can't make decisions for you.
No, but let's say review contracts annually.
If they're annual contracts. It depends on what.
I know, but who does that?
It's a collective effort. So a couple slides back, we mentioned that we have a team of 3 people who work with these communities. So we're not necessarily saying to you or showing you that analysis, but in preparing your proposed budget, that thought process needs to be done. So, but the goal is to present that to the board and say, this is what we feel is a realistic budget for you. And usually the evidence is in the notes. It should be in the notes in the proposed budget that you receive.
But prior to budgeting, if you want, while we start several months in advance, if you think it's time to get new landscape contracts, we should be trying to get some pricing in for you. If there's some other janitorial services, those types of things that we can do prior to budgeting. So we'll have that to look at when we really sit down and start doing,
What about communicate with collections attorneys to re-strategize aging accounts?
That's an ongoing process. That's not necessarily just a budget process. That is something that needs to be done periodically. The budget process and the whole financial process is a collective effort. So your ACM team working with your board. So we can't do it all without your input, like you're expecting us to give you recommendations as well.
I've called my collection attorneys. I have about 3 of them. And we've worked out a strategy on how to address these very delinquent homeowners. And we communicate regularly because there's a lot of money involved.
Right.
So,
sometimes it's a case-by-case basis as you go through the year.
Yeah, and I don't, although I have a great community manager, et cetera, et cetera.
You take some responsibility.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's a reflection on us as well as you and your community. The whole process is to build a relationship. Is to be as collective and as a joint process in developing your annual budget. It really should be as joint of a process as possible. As an accountant, I'm not going to know that you're necessarily talking about repaving roads. I'm not at your meeting. but we have other people or on your property. So we have other members of our team who actually puts eyes and ears, and that's why as one individual to develop a budget, we thought a team effort made more sense so that the various expertise can come together. Your property manager who knows all about inspecting your property and looking at your common elements and probably know very little about collections. So we really come together to try to give you as good of a product, and we always invite feedback. I mean, if we can, and we always, what we've tried to do starting last year is we also send, and you're going to kill me for saying this, but we also try to send an accounting person to your budget hearing, because sometimes, our community managers are great, but sometimes accounting people can better explain the numbers and how we arrived at certain calculations and certain line items. So again, use your team. So if you're just relying on your community manager heavily for everything, that we're a little bit different. We try to do community management a little differently. But yes, it's a joint responsibility. It really, really is, so that we can come up with the best product. So looking at the main thing that I wanted to drive home here is the importance of looking at your financials throughout the year. Preventing and mitigating any financial concerns as quickly as possible. Making it a practice to review your detailed monthly report to detect any concerns. We can work with you to develop cost projections. Again, communicating with homeowners if there are red flags and presenting a plan. We can work with you to come up with that. We usually see that transparency and communication typically works well in a community. Reevaluating the necessity of expenses by line item. So we don't just look at the budget as a whole. We actually go line by line to look at levels and what items are coming up. Specifically, we look at utilities, for example. If we see spikes or changes, we try to look at, well, what happened there? Why did this change? If it's just your public area lighting, it shouldn't change. It shouldn't double in a year. So things of that nature. If it's a variable cost, obviously, we're trying to take in account that there may be ebbs and flows. But generally speaking, we do go line by line. In the essence of time, I really can't get as detailed into that. But collections, for example, general legal, we talk to you. Are you planning to spend general funds? Do you plan amendments or things that will require the services of an attorney? What are your collections efforts? Are you planning to change strategy there? Are you planning to go the more aggressive route, which may be more costly, but may yield you more cost benefit? Are there special projects that might require an engineer and a consultant? Meeting costs. So really it should be an evolving discussion and possibly shifting between line items. Other sources, special assessments, requiring a vote. This is where that thought process will possibly lead you to determine, okay, we're not, within our budget. We haven't contained all of our costs within our budget. What are our other options? The acts typically provide for an increase in assessments if there's the event of safety without requiring a vote. So those are extreme, but it's good to know that there are options. And again, alternative financing and things to consider as well. So I don't want to take any more time because I want to make sure that Doug has his time to present. And then we're going to do a joint Q&A at the end, but if there's any questions or for any members of our team that we can answer, feel free to raise your hand. Okay. Well, I'm going to bring up Doug. Again, Doug is from DMA Interactive Reserves. He's been an architect for over 35 years, so he's a reliable source. He has design experience in all types of construction projects, including residential, commercial, and industrial. I'm just buying you some time while you get set up. He's a licensed architect in Virginia and North Carolina, and is a member of the National Council of Architectural Registration Board. So we thank Doug for coming all the way here from Richmond, Virginia. And I hope that you'll like his product. It's a unique product for planning your reserve funding levels.
Okay. Okay, can I have your attention?
I don't think this is accurate.
I'm going to talk about these folks in a minute, but
Again, my name is Doug Greene. I'm an architect by trade. My company is DMA Interactive Reserves. The longer legal name is Design Management Associates, and we're out of Richmond, Virginia. I've been in business with this company for 22 years, and my clientele is primarily homeowner associations, condominiums, and also developers of new communities. But I have had about a 40-year experience in architecture in all of its aspects, construction, design, etc., and have kind of gradually moved in this direction through my current company. And I'm going to talk about interactive reserves, which is a little bit different from a standard reserve study. How many of you folks have had a reserve study or had some experience with reserve studies? Okay, just about everybody. The standard reserve study, then, you know, is a consultant who often is an architect or engineering-based person in terms of their background, comes to your community and looks at everything in your community and develops a study that identifies essentially those items that are long-term replacement items that you need to be essentially preparing to have money for when you need to replace them. And Theresa mentioned a little bit different between reserves and maintenance items. Maintenance items are typically items that you're dealing with every year to just maintain your community on an ongoing basis. It may include things that are related to larger components. For example, if you've got machinery with motors that have belts that need to be replaced every so often or something like that, or need some kind of maintenance that may happen every 2 or 3 years, that's fine. That's a maintenance item that just keeps the machine operating, okay? When you have to replace the machine, that's a reserve component. That's also different from adding something new to your property. If you want to add a playground that you haven't had before, that's not a reserve item. A reserve item is only something that you already have that you're putting money aside to replace. So a new facility is a capital improvement, and you really need to come up with the funds for that separately. The reserve account is just once you have things in your community that you have to maintain, then we're setting aside money to replace them as they need to be replaced or renovated. Okay, so who are these people? That's a board of directors. After we've done their reserve study. And there's 2 things about these folks that you might note. One is they look like they're prepared to go into whatever mission they're going to go into. And the reason they look like they're prepared is because they have a lot of equipment, a lot of tools to help them in their quest. That's really what our goal is in providing a reserve study, is to give you a tool to manage your property. If you don't have the proper tool, things happen that you're not prepared for. Theresa mentioned the 2 aspects of management that this company provides, which is property management and community management. I'm going to add a third area, or discipline if you will, called facilities management. Facilities management is the aspect of management which is dealing with just maintaining a facility, maintaining property. And facilities managers have to be able to do 2 things. Number 1, they have to be able to develop a plan so they can expect what they have to do when they have to do it. And the other thing they have to do is deal with what they call observed outcomes. Observed outcomes mean all those things that didn't happen according to the plan. How often does that happen? All the time. Okay? So your plan has to be moldable. It has to be adjustable. If you just have, and that's why we're doing what we call interactive reserves, if you just get a report, which is a snapshot at one point in time, and then you go on and deal with all of the things that didn't happen according to the plan, you're having trouble making use of that report long term. So I'm going to show you what we do, and what I'm going to do is go through a process with our, an example of a couple of examples of a community and what our reserve analysis does. The one thing that we do, in addition to giving you a report and sending you a bill, we do those 2 things like everybody else does, is we sit down with you and go through the reserve study with you, just as I'm doing here. It might be in a live meeting, or it might be in an online meeting. I did that with ACM managers a few weeks ago, where I actually sat in my office and did exactly the same thing. They had this up on the screen, okay? But either way, we go through the reserve account with you.
go through what is in the study, what the components are that we identified, what we've said about them, and then what the funding plan should be. And you folks as a board actually help develop the funding plan that works for your community. Without that interaction, we don't know all of the things that you know about your priorities, about your concerns. When we come out and look at your community briefly, you know, I'm there for a day or two, and I'm talking to the manager, and I may talk to a couple board members, but I'm not going to get the full picture of what you're dealing with on an ongoing basis. So when we have this, what we call a working session, an interactive working session, those things can come out. And a lot of times those come out in reaction to what you see that we put on the screen. Okay? We've made this assumption, we've seen these things, we've observed these things, and you say, oh no, that's not true. We didn't put that thing in 2010, we put it in 2005. Okay, we can adjust that right then while we're talking. And we can then recalculate our reserves while we're talking. So that's the goal of the working session, is we're going to learn more from you, you're going to learn from us how the system works, and together we're going to develop a plan that works for your community. The second part of that is we're going to give you a tool by which you can manage ongoing what your input information is. When you do something, when you replace it, what you spend for it, you can put into the schedule of components. Because you're familiar with the term garbage in, garbage out. A lot of reserve studies, but the biggest problem that a lot of reserve study providers have is getting good information, historic information, about what happened in the community in the past. Records get lost, people forget, or we don't talk to the right people. So if you have a way to maintain that record on an ongoing basis, then we can come back, and as Theresa said, we can come back every year really at budget time and adjust that plan, steer it a little bit, depending on what you've actually done in your community in the past year. And there's other things too. We'll talk in a minute about inflation. Inflation's been pretty steady, even though people have been predicting that it's going to go up every year. Someday it will go up, I assume. Hopefully it won't go down and go into negative territory, but someday that will change, and we can change the inflation rate in the study and recalculate it based on that as well. So I'm going to show you a typical community. And this example is a condominium community, which is basically, it's a 2-over-2 condominium. They kind of look like townhouses, but they're actually condominiums, which means that the exterior of these buildings, the maintenance of the exterior of these buildings is the responsibility of the association as a condominium, as well as the property. This community has private streets. Of course, it has driveways, sidewalks. It does have a playground. This one doesn't have any other amenities, but you might have a community that has a swimming pool or other types of amenities like that. But a condominium, of course, is probably the most intensive type of association because the exterior of the building or buildings itself are the responsibility typically of the association. The unit owner just owns the interior of the unit. And I'm going to look at this as a new community. And so the first thing we do, and what I'm doing, all of our work is done in Excel and in Excel format, and I'm actually showing you the spreadsheets that we work with. We then print from these and print a report that we send to you for the report that you have at the end of the exercise. But we're going to start, and you're not going to be able to read that, are you? No. All right. I think that thing is probably focused as well as you can focus. I'll bring that up a little more. There are two ways of, there's a lot of ways of doing a lot of things, but there's two ways of identifying components, and if you may be familiar with reserve studies that have what I'm going to call a summary identification of components, meaning you have private roads, they're going to have a line item for pavements, for replacing pavements, okay? Or you have roofs on the building, they're going to have a line item for shingle roofs, or vinyl siding, that sort of thing. What we do in this study because remember, we're making a tool that you can help maintain, is we're going to break this down as much as we can into discrete components that vary in different parts of the community. So if this community has several roads, I'm going to give you the quantity and the cost for replacing the pavement in each road. So here we've got asphalt overlay, milling. If you're familiar with that, in most roads actually now, where you have what's called a curb and gutter that comes down to the pavement. To repave that road, you have to actually take the first layer of pavement off and then come back, so you don't keep building the road up higher and higher. So we've got that for road 1, road 2, road 3, road 4, etc. This way, if I just had roads and pavement, I'm giving you a broad-based budget number, but you may not need to repave all the roads at one time, okay? You may want to do different roads at different times, depending on what their condition is. And that condition will vary depending on a lot of things, maybe depending on the ground condition under the road. So we want to break these down so that you have the opportunity to decide what projects you're going to do when. Which leads me to another point. A reserve study is a budgeting tool. It is not your maintenance plan. I'm not telling you what to do when. I'm telling you when I think you may need to do something, and I'm putting aside the money for that, so you'll have the money when we think you'll need to do it. The people who decide what the maintenance plan are you and your manager together. Okay? You're the ones who live with it. And you're the ones, well, let's talk about something else. You're going to see a lot of line items in here, but how many reserve budgets do you have? You have one. So you have to prioritize from that budget what you're going to do when. And there may be a lot of competing interests in these components. So you're going to have to develop that plan, and not just on what the component is, but on what, how much money you've got, what your priorities are. A lot of reserve components don't fail catastrophically. A roof fails catastrophically. When it starts leaking, it's failed, okay? And you've got to replace that. But a road doesn't fail catastrophically. It just gets old, like we all do. And it may take more and more maintenance, or it may need more and more repairs, and at some point it makes sense to just resurface the road. Okay? But there's a range of a period of time in there that you as a board can weigh that and decide when you need to do it. Okay? That's true for an awful lot of components in your community. I'm going to go across this and just show you what's in the study. We obviously are identifying the projects here on this one side. We then note where it is, how much of it there is. This is the quantity. This is the unit of measure, which in this case is square yards. We have a place in the study to comment on it. Oops. Rather than writing a long narrative report, what we do is we just have a comment section right in the schedule, and those comments can change as conditions change, as observations change on that component. Then we go over, and another very important thing, and you won't see this in a lot of reserve studies. In a lot of reserve studies, you'll see the component name, the quantity, and when they think it ought to be replaced. And based on when they think it ought to be replaced, they're going to have an estimated useful life or remaining life. Okay? But they don't give you the date when it was put into service. We try to establish that, and over time that will be better, because you're going to record the date when you actually replace something. By having the date that we know when it was put in service, that helps us project more accurately when we think you need to replace it again. So that's in there, and that is a number that you can change when you do a project and put in the new date. We have the estimated useful life, and then we have, of course, this was a new community, so the estimated useful life and remaining life are the same, which produces a year when that is expected to be replaced. Depending on the project, we can identify either 100% replacement or partial replacement. There are some types of components, like sidewalks or any kind of concrete work, driveways. You're just not going to replace those all at one time, okay? So you want to have some way to have an allowance for money to replace things when they need to be. There are going to be sections of sidewalks that, because of forces on them, whether it's tree roots or soil problems or vehicles driving over them. I had one community where they had a road and a sidewalk, and the mailboxes were on the back side of the sidewalk, and the postal
post guy drove his truck up on the sidewalk to put the mail in the boxes. Okay? Sidewalk wasn't really designed for that, so eventually had to replace the sidewalk. But the point is to allow you to have funds to replace a long-term component like that on an ongoing periodic basis with a smaller percentage. And we can adjust that percentage based on your actual experience. Then we go on over and we calculate, since we've been measuring these by a unit, we then have a unit replacement cost, and then that unit cost times the percentage of replacement gives us a total cost per replacement over here in the study. And that's what this input information is showing us. Now in this community we have, as I said, we have roads, we have an allowance for patching. In addition to paving, we may have an allowance for patching, which is some roads have areas that they just have special problems and they need to be repaired more often. We can put in an allowance for that. Concrete curb and gutter, as I said, is going to be a partial replacement item, or walks and paths. Going on down, a lot of people don't think of this, but in a community with private roads, often the infrastructure under the roads is yours as well, meaning the stormwater system. Usually the water and the sanitary sewer is going to be city or county in easements, but the stormwater system is usually yours. And things happen to that. You have erosion problems, you have sinkholes developing, things where there's a break in the system. And again, I don't expect you to have to replace the whole system, but we're going to identify that system and have some money in the budget for partial work. Yes?
You have a line item for unit replacement cost.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you've allocated a particular dollar amount to each unit that comprises this condominium for this particular replacement? Or
the unit replacement cost is a method of estimating the cost. So it's like a per square foot or per square yard cost. That's all that is. Yeah.
I was thinking of condo unit.
No. Sometimes that's the unit we may use. Okay, depending on the item. But yeah, it's a method of estimating cost. All right. Okay, so let's see. We're going to go on down. So these are all site work components that you're looking at. They have a playground, and we have those items in here. You can see where they are. Then we get into buildings. And I've got some components which would be handled normally consistently with all the buildings or as a percentage. And then we go in and do components by building. Again, I think this has 12 buildings or something. So this is a long schedule, but it goes by building. And again, the reason we have it that long is and actually these buildings were built, let's say, over 3 years. So they do have a little bit different life expectancy. You're ultimately going to get to the point where you're going to decide which roofs you have to replace when, and I want to be able to have you be able to record that when you did this roof on this building and not on the other buildings. So that's why we have it broken down this way. It gets pretty long. Another item we can do, these folks have wood decks, and they say, we don't like these wood decks, we'd like to replace them with Trex decking or something, okay? That item in red is an alternate. Okay. Now I can run the funding with that alternate, or I can run the funding with the wood decking. I've got them both shown, and I can zero one or the other out. And so when we're in a working session, we can sit and talk about what does it mean if we want to replace all these with Trex. How will that work with our funding plan? Okay. That's an option we can do. The default method in any reserve item when you're funding for replacement is to replace with what's there, the same item. But we get a lot of people. I'm sure everyone has their own happy stories about developers. A lot of things don't get built with the quality that you would like, and so we often get requests from people, even like for a playground. This is a bunch of junk. Don't put the replacement of that in there. When you put in the replacement cost, let's get something better. So if you give us that direction, we'll do that. So this goes on per building all the way down to the bottom. Now this is obviously it's kind of an encyclopedia of what you own and what you're responsible for. It doesn't help you quite understand when you're going to do things, when you expect to have to do things. So we take all this information and translate it into a per year cost. And this is a new community, so they didn't have much happening in the first few years. Let's go down here a ways, where we now get you can see the projects expected in any given year, okay? And because I've reduced the scale of this, it's not showing the cost. So, particularly in the first 5 years of a plan, when the board's evaluating the study and saying, you know, what are we really going to have to pay for? You can look at this. You can look at this schedule and say, are we really thinking we're going to do these projects in that year? You may say, yeah, I think we want to defer this project a couple of years out, or you've got a project out here in 2020 that I really want to do in 2017. So we can make those adjustments right in the working session, right while we're sitting there talking. And of course, we supply you a draft of the study in advance of that working session, so you can kind of go through that and figure out what you want to talk about, what you may have questions about before we get into that session.
Question.
Yes.
Why would you rent the boom lift for the roofs?
Why would I rent the boom lift?
Yeah, wouldn't, if you're hiring a contractor to replace the roofs?
He is. What I'm doing is noting that cost. Because what you get in reserve planning, if you're not thinking about it, is, let me make that answer better. There are standard costs databases for replacements of things. We use a standard cost database like everyone else. We use a database called RS Means Cost Data, which is a national cost database. All right. So that has things like replacing shingles in it. Okay. But if you just pull out that cost for replacing shingles, you may not pick up the entire cost for that project. This is a 4-story building. They're going to have to crane everything up to it. Okay. I do a lot of high-rise condominiums, and you have the replacement of flat roof cost, and you have like $700 a square meaning 100 square feet of roofing, $700 a square. Well, the real cost for doing that might be $3,000 or $4,000 a square by the time you put in all of the other costs that are involved in doing that project. So all I did here was identify that that was a cost to that project, and I wanted to note that because we have an estimating formula we use. We actually have a cost estimator that works for us, who develops our costs. And so I may have a regular 2-story building where I'm just going to put his estimated roofing cost, and he's built in all the other costs into that, but he doesn't build in the cost of having a crane involved. So then I'm going to add that in for a higher building. Okay? Yes?
Now I look at these costs as being estimates.
Yes.
So if I say, okay, we're going to replace all the roofs, and we go out with bids, to get bids on this, it could change.
Absolutely. They will.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a lot of things that impact costs. We're trying to get you in the ballpark, but again, and this is why we have this tool so you can update it by the year, is when you actually do the project, you can put in, there's a section in this, I'll show you this. There's a section in this schedule where you can put in your actual cost history. So this is something you folks can maintain as you go along. When I say you folks, it may be the manager who's doing this for you, whatever, but can maintain when you replace that roof and you've got the price you're using, you're going to put in the date you did that and what you actually spent on it. Okay, that's going to override our estimate, and that lets us then just steer the thing for as we go into the future, knowing what the actual cost was. There are a lot of things that impact costs. You know, we used to a few years ago ask pavers about asphalt costs, and they say, "Well, I'll tell you what it'll be today, but I can't tell you tomorrow because I figure it's going to go up." You know, they're not talking that line right now because it's all gone down. But there are those fluctuations that occur in the marketplace. Okay, so that is the input information on this schedule, and then this schedule is the input information. Now the next thing we do is look at a snapshot of what is the health of your account, of your reserve account. People always, and this is information that scares people usually. I think in the handout we passed out included a list of CII national standards for reserve studies. And I'd be likely to say the RS after my name is Reserve Specialist, which is a certification by CAI. And there are requirements we have to meet to become certified as a reserve specialist, and we have to follow these standards. One of the things that CAA wants us to tell you, and they don't define how we should tell you, but they want us to tell you in the study what we think the health of your reserve account is. And we do that in our studies by using what's called a component method analysis. And I don't know if you are familiar with the term component method versus cash flow method. Nobody, okay.
I think they did ours both ways.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
They did them both ways.
A lot of people do. The component method of calculating your reserves is to take each component as a line item and saying, this component costs so many dollars to replace and it's going to last so many years. How much money should I put aside for it? So if I've got an item that's going to last 10 years and it's going to cost $10,000 to replace, I should put $1,000 a year in. And if I'm in year 6, I should have $6,000 saved for that component. That's component method of funding, essentially. And that's essentially kind of pretending that every component has its own account, okay, which is not true. But that's what it's doing. Cash flow method looks at the fact that you have one account and that you're going to have expected expenditures out of that account every year, and they're going to vary. And so that plots all the expected expenditures over different years and says, what do we have to do to fund to meet those needs? It's a little different from component funding. It usually requires you to contribute less money. Component funding usually calls for a higher contribution, and it is usually, in our view, overfunding the account. But we use that as a starting point to look at what is the health of the account. So here I've got all these components. What we do is we treat them as if they were individual accounts and say, how much money should I have been putting toward that component each year to be fully funding it at 100%? And that's what these numbers over here are. This next item is 0 because, again, this was a new community, so they don't have any history on it yet. But it's how much money you should be developing, and there are some items that are older here, so they do have a projected balance in it. How much should you be putting in the account each year, and how much should you have in the account now if you are going to consider it as 100% funded? And I get down to the bottom of this. And it gives me a number. Oh, they should have been putting $96,000 a year in their account. And again, it's a new community. They should have $179,000 in their account this year. We summarize this here. Summarize it here. Saying they should have been putting in $96,000. They should have had $179,000. They've got $105,000, so they're 58% funded. That's all that's telling us, is where you are at a point in time, okay? And that's all we use that method for. What we do then for planning the future is what's called cash flow method accounting. And what that does is it looks at your account over the, we use a 30-year window. Some studies use a 20-year window. And this is looking at, again, where these expenditures are happening, and that's where these red bars are right here, where the different expenditures are. And if I click on that, click on that, that's going to give me the year. That's what that red bar is coming from, is the year. So they vary in different years. This is the growth of your reserve account based on what's being contributed in the account every year. And this yellow line, you'll see we have, obviously we have a bottom here, which is $0. And one way to calculate how much reserve money you need to have is to keep it above 0, obviously. That's a no-brainer. But the more effective way is to say, let's set a minimum account balance above 0 that we want to keep in the account at any time in the worst year. That's essentially establishing a contingency value, if you will. We know things aren't going to happen exactly as we planned, so we don't want to plan the account to draw down to 0 because we might miss our mark. So we set a threshold above that. We have a normal setting, which is hard to read, but it's 5% of your expected total expenditures over the next 20 years. some boards actually vote on a number that they want to have as a minimum for their balance for their account. It's an arbitrary number. It's what you want for your safety net, essentially, for a threshold. Now, I said this community was, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. This is looking at current dollars, if you will. All of the costs that I projected out here are in current dollars. But we have a tool here where we can apply an inflation rate. And we do that by looking back historically at what inflation has been. And these are look-back periods, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, down to 15 years. If I look at the average inflation over the last 15 years, it was 3.7%. If I go and look at it over the past, and what happened when I did that is it adjusted the future value of all these replacement costs. And we didn't change your contribution, so you see what happens. Things are going to cost more in the future, and that contribution isn't supporting that. I normally use the last 5 years, which is here in this instance was 2.39%. Inflation's been pretty static, hasn't changed much essentially in the last few years. So I like to use the 5-year average, and part of the reason for that is we also plug into our calculations the money you're earning on your funds that you have in the reserve account. You have them in a money market. If you have a lot of funds, you may have them somewhat invested into CDs or some bonds or something like that. But we're going to project and what are money markets earning? Less than 1%, third of 1%. Yes.
How do the red bars differ from the green bars?
The red bars are just showing the expenditures in any given year. So what happens? This is pretty intuitive. This is a savings account. It's earning money. You're building up a savings pot. Now you're starting to spend money, and it's drawing that money down. Every time you have a big red bar, it's pulling your account balance down. It's just that simple. Okay?
You want to stay above the yellow line.
Yeah.
Always. Always.
Okay. So, where was I? All right. So I have, again, this is all in current dollars. The contribution is still in current dollars. And let me go back and look at this thing. This said to be 100% funded. They should have been putting in $96,000, almost $97,000 a year. They are putting in $60,000 a year. No wonder they're underfunded. Okay? They're not putting in enough money. That's not surprising. Developers of new communities usually set the assessment low because they want to sell houses. Okay? So this community is about 60% funded, and we're saying they're doing $60,000 a year, and we put in the inflation rate, and we're coming down a little low. So what I can do here is say, let's increase the contribution by an amount every year, and this is what this little calculator is doing. And saying, and what this is saying right now is if I just increase that by 0.5% every year, that's 60,000. You can see that going up here a little bit. That's going to make this account work. Now, so that's a funding solution. Okay? What that's showing in this graph is all of these expenditures out here are fully funded when they need to be, when the money needs to be there. Okay? What's wrong with this picture now? This thing was only 60% funded, but it only takes 0.5% per year, actually less than the inflation rate, to fully fund it over 30 years. Why? I wonder why that is.
Because the time period.
Yeah. Well, it actually points to a weakness of the cash flow method, and I want you to be aware of this because there's a way to deal with it, and I'm going to deal with it in a second. This is a new community, as I said. One of the big expenditures in this community is replacement of the siding. We've given the siding a 40-year life. Where's your 40 on this graph? It ain't there. Okay? So that isn't taken into account. And a cash flow study funds everything within the window of the cash flow period. Okay? So let's deal with that. The way to deal with that in cash flow funding, go to another, my next iteration of this, is to say, right here. And I should have noted that in vinyl siding, in the one I was just showing you, we had a 40-year life, and so we had the replacement cost at 100% in that 40 years. If I know that that's going to be outside the window, what I can do is put a date within the window of the study and calculate a percentage of the money that I'd like to have toward that component accumulated within that window. So I put 32 years, and I've said I'd like to have 80% of those funds available in year 32. Okay, that's how I deal with that in a cash flow study. So having done that, having adjusted that, now I've got this graph. That's that big bar over here. That's all that money we'd like to have accumulated for long life items that are outside of that. And so again, let's put the inflation rate in. And the scale of this graph changes depending on the size of the dollars we're looking at. So now I've got to fund a little bit more aggressively to accommodate that future need. Now this is a decision that the board can make. Let me see, I think that I took that threshold out, so let's put that back in. Because of the scale of this graph, it's going to be hard to see here, but that threshold line is actually going uphill slightly because we allow that to be indexed to inflation so that the value relative to the account stays the same all the time. So I'm staying above the threshold here out in year 30, and now I'm having to increase that funding by 5.8% per year against that 2.4% inflation rate, and that makes sense. I'm having to escalate my funding at a higher rate than the inflation rate because I was underfunded. Now I've captured that in this analysis. You as a board can decide whether you want to do that or not. You can decide, well, we want that, we don't want to deal with that now. We want that vinyl siding to be funded within a 30-year window, so we'll wait until it's within 30 years before we start funding for it. Now, I wouldn't recommend that here because that was a major part of this community. But there are going to be communities where you may have a few long life items and you say it isn't worth dealing with those. We'll have a 30-year funding plan for them. So when their life expectancy falls within the 30-year window, they'll get picked up and we'll start funding them for that. But in a new community where you have major long life items, you just want to remember to be able to do this. Now let's take this same community and let's say it's 10 years old. It's not new. So all those line items out here that I had have moved up a little bit. They've moved a little farther this way. This got bigger because now I'm still not. Let's see. Some of these are a little older, and my percentage of replacement is a little higher now. That's not the right one. Not in the right one. Okay. Still not in the right one. Okay. Here's a 10-year-old community. So 10 years old, so some of those major expenditures have moved forward. Now, these siding replacements are actually coming up within the window of the community. So they're in there at 100%. Let's say the community is still funded at 60%. So now they've got, in year 10, they should have had $1,143,000 in there. They've got $666,000. They're still funded at just under 60%. That didn't change that number in terms of what they should have been funding it at. And they're still funding at 60%, or 60,000. So that changes the calculation a little bit when I put in the inflation rate. If they've gotten to year 10, or they're that much farther down the line and they're underfunded, what's going to happen? They're going to have to increase their funding at a little faster rate. Okay, that's 7% per year. So that's how some of these things, so a lot of people ask, well, what does it mean if you're 60% funded? Is that good or bad? Well, it depends on the age of the community and how close you are to having to replace some major things as to whether that's good or bad. Yeah?
I have two questions. I'm sold on the spreadsheet, but when we purchase the reserve study, do we purchase the spreadsheet and then we keep the spreadsheet? We can play with it in the future?
No, you don't purchase our software. What you play with is you're updating the input information. So you get the schedule of components in an Excel spreadsheet, which you can then put in when you do things and what you spent for them. At any time, you can send that back to us, and we can very quick. You can see how quickly I'm doing this here. We can plug that into our model and quickly adjust the this plan. And we can do that, either we can do that and send it back to you, or we can do that as I'm doing it here, or in an online meeting, we can do it together. So we can look together at the impact of these changes and play with it together. But yeah, we are the interface for you with our software.
And my second question is, the first year, all the data is being put in. The second year, you're just updating it. What is the cost?
Okay.
Does the cost then vary?
Yes. The typical approach to reserve studies, and CAI has a schedule called Level 1, Level 2, Level 3 reserve studies. A Level 1 reserve study is a new reserve study where you're coming in cold and identifying everything, measuring it, estimating it, and developing this plan. A Level 2 study, which when people come back every 3 to 5 years, as Theresa said, you may have the consultant come back and reevaluate everything on the property, but he has a schedule established. So that Level 2 study would be cheaper. It might be 60–70% of the Level 1 study cost. What I'm talking about doing here on an annual basis is what we would call a Level 3 study, which is just a financial update. I'm not coming out to your community. I'm not reevaluating anything. We're just adjusting what you did this year. Maybe the inflation rate changed or the earnings rate changed, the numbers have changed, and we're just going to adjust the funding plan. We do that on an hourly basis, and it may be 1 or 2 hours. So it's just an hourly rate.
Since I currently have somebody I'm paying only to update, I'm not having to do the Level 1, and to change it to your firm, I'd have to start with the Level 1 cost. Is there any incentive for me to be able to switch?
I guess the incentive is you're going to get the added flexibility of working with the system. If, to the extent that the previous study has a good schedule of components and you're comfortable with what they've identified and what they've quantified, we can work with that as a starting point. The one thing we usually end up doing, though, is, as I said, a lot of studies will have things not broken down into different parts of the community. So we may incur the cost of breaking that down and just, reevaluating that at that level. So we might still propose on a Level 2 study, starting with your existing study, and depending on what we see in terms of the existing study and how much work we think we'd have to do to get it into our format, that's what our price is based on.
And what's the average cost?
It varies depending on what's in the community, how many things we have to assess and how many things we have to deal with. I would say typically it goes anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000. It depends on the community. Yes.
For a community that doesn't have private roads, doesn't have the play equipment, or single-family homes, give me an example of what we would need a reserve study for.
Well, it really, some communities don't own much of anything, frankly. An HOA with single-family homes. You may have a front entrance feature, some things like that. If you have amenities like a swimming pool or tennis courts, you're going to have those things that are in the reserve item. So those kinds of common area amenities. And that's like a lot of large single-family home communities. The reserve study may only deal with the swimming pool and the tennis courts and the front entrances and some other features that are improvements on that, because all of the roads are public and none of the things related to the houses are owned by the community. You may have a clubhouse,
Yeah,
okay? So those are the kinds of things that go into that reserve study.
a clubhouse, a pool,
Yeah.
and the sun.
Yep. Okay. Yes?
Once you switch to this, is it recommended or even necessary to maybe every 15 or 20 years go back and do another level 2? Or
Well, we like to do it about every 5 years or so, just to go and see how things are aging. Okay? Because we have to test that against what our assumptions were, you know, how are things really holding up. So we would, actually, I'm from Virginia, as I said. Virginia actually passed a law that requires them every 5 years. Okay? They don't require that you fund the account, but they require that you do the study. Virginia did that mainly because of the real estate community who was concerned about buyers buying into a community and not knowing what they're buying into. You're either buying a lot of assets or you're buying a lot of liabilities.
even though you're updating it constantly, that updating is done by the community and not an expert? Is that kind of...
The only updating that the community is doing is when you do a project and what you spend on it. In terms of evaluating the quality, that's why we would come back, is to evaluate the condition of components.
Do you know in Maryland, is there a requirement every 2 years?
Not that I know of, no. Okay. Very few states have requirements related to reserve studies or funding of reserves. Now, there are some other, I think FHA has a minimum like 10% of your budget to be assigned to reserves for FHA-funded housing. And that's usually low. 10% is usually, as a percentage of your budget, is usually low. So they say that or have a reserve study done.
Thank you.
I see people are needing to run. I had one more example with this same community, a little bit older, but I think you got the idea that it goes up. You may also have to make a jump in your funding in 1 year, or you can look at a special assessment if you have a peak item you need to get over. And we also have a loan calculator in here, so that if you're in a situation where you need to consider doing a loan, we can put that loan calculation in here and look at that funding plan as well. Any other questions? Okay. That's the long and short of it.